So, some key organizational design concepts. Of course, labor is divided and coordinated. So, you see that different things in how you organize the work in an agency might be divided by occupation. You can have a whole department of just one type of occupation. It could be by a task. It could be by specialization, like a set of experts that do one particular thing. And organizations may differentiate their work by the function to meet a certain client population. So maybe there's the Center for Aging, and everybody works in that area. And then subdividing work creates breaks in workflow. So, while that's good, it's kind of like makes it clear that this area does one thing and that area does something else. When you think about it from a care perspective, sometimes it's those breaks in workflow that make it very difficult for patients and families to learn how to navigate in particularly healthcare organizations. So, and it can make things very choppy. So it's just important when you're thinking through structures in an agency. Is this a good structure or is it a bad structure? What works about it? What doesn't work about it? And so we'll go through some other more key points about that. So you think about, how do managers really control work? Because one of the key functions of a leader is to control things and control the work and see that the work by others is done. So how do you control the quality of the work, the setup of how you get the same thing again and again and again? And the answer to that is standardization. So that's why you have a procedure in a hospital. We control the work by doing training. We first set up a standard in either a procedure, a policy, a protocol, and it's standard, and it doesn't matter where you're at in the organization, you're going to administer blood and check off blood before you administer it in the exact same way. And that way you control the process of that work. So those are just some examples. That's one example of some things that are standardized, but there are a lot more of them that I'm sure you can identify. So organizational forms, coordination and the division of labor influence the size and the degree of centralization and formalization. So that's an important point to know. If you have a very large organization, the work units keep getting subdivided more and more and more. And organizational coordination then is measured by the degree of how much of that's centralized under one division, or how formalized is it, because sometimes it's like not really clearly defined and less strictly set up. And you call this the hierarchy or the structure of authority. These are the 5 basic organizational forms, and we're going to touch on each one of those. But I would encourage you, from looking at this, think about the agency that you've just gotten hired in and the department that you're going to be working. Do you know what kind of organizational structure is in place? When you go to orientation, I promise you, at some point in your general orientation, they're going to pull you out an organizational chart or put you looking at that in some kind of online module so you can kind of see how the organization is set up. So make sure to think about it like, is this set up functionally? Is it set up by a program? Is it set up parallel? Is it modified, or is it matrix? And we're seeing matrix is a newer model. It's very complex sometimes, but many organizations in healthcare are moving to more matrix models. So this is a basic functional model. You've got a senior level team, And we see this a lot in healthcare. You know, nursing's under one department, pharmacy's under another department, dietary's under another department, social services, environmental services, and you could go on and on. So the benefits is it reduces cost. You know, you've got everybody kind of learning the same thing. Actually, performance is usually better and you get higher quality. So that is the ideal parts of that. However, the problem is when you look at it, it's just like silos. Nursing really doesn't know what pharmacy's doing, and pharmacy doesn't know what nursing's doing. Same thing for all these other interdisciplinary things. And as we know, more and more, all of our work is interdisciplinary. So having a functional forum used to make a lot of sense, and you'll still see a lot of remnants of this. So different kinds of structures have had to be put in place to make sure that care delivery is really connected between the types of care that's provided. So another method that you may see is a program form. And this is looking at like who is our customer and how do we organize care based on the customers. So if somebody's going to be getting medical surgical services, you have a division for medical surgical services, and they may have certain pharmacies in the hospital that just provide care there. They have their own social services department. They have their own dietary, and everything falls under the service line. So this you usually call a program form. The benefits of that is it capitalizes on experts, so everybody really becomes an expert in emergency care, and you have a great multidisciplinary approach, which is very satisfying, but it's really hard to coordinate services among programs, and there's a huge duplication of resources because we have to have twice as many things because we're having that many different kinds of people, supplies, and everything in all these different areas, whereas we probably could streamline some of that if we had more of a centralized approach to that. So then there's a parallel form, and this is where you see coordination across functional departments. So if you go back up and you look at the functional form, you see the separate department heads, right? And then you think about in a parallel form, they have like task force, teams, they have standing committees where all these departments have to come together to make decisions. So you've kind of got a functional form over here, but you have a parallel form of a different kind of a, not necessarily personnel, but different committee structures that ensure that there is more cross-functional work. And then there's a modified program form, and again, it's there put in place to offset some of this fragmentation, the siloing that takes place in program structures, where people get like, okay, I'm in pharmacy in one division, I'm kind of like disconnected from the pharmacy as a whole. And so they may keep, the organizations have a program structure, but they figure out some integrative mechanisms that kind of unify the functions within the occupations across those different programs. And the issue that you find sometimes with this is a nurse manager is in medical surgical, but they really don't have much control over, they're just really kind of dealing with the clinical day-to-day and this kind of thing. So that's the one drawback to a modified program form is nurse managers may kind of deal with more of the clinical aspects of care versus any of the more deeper personnel issues or overall operations. And then last of all, there's a matrix form. And this one is like kind of like tying it together. So people in work are organized along both the functional and program dimensions so that they almost have two people they report to. So this makes it flexible, easy to change. You can kind of be more efficient with some of the services that I mentioned that you may not be when there's duplication. It also lets you draw on talented pool of personnel. So, if I'm an emergency, but I really need nursing to kind of work together on some task, or, pull staff from one area to the other to work when work is needed more in one service versus another, it allows for that flexibility. The only problem about this is it's extremely costly, because you often have to have specialized people that are hired. They're going to oversee some of this, and it can be costly. So here's the thing with organizational charts. Know that the picture of it really has some little nuances to it. If you see that there are solid lines on an organizational chart, it means a flow of authority. If you have staff positions, or like they're more like an advisory job, a good example might be staff development. You have an educator on your unit that's assigned from staff development to be your staff development person, but your nurse manager really has no authority over that staff development person, because their boss is in staff development. So they may have on the organizational chart like their position, but instead of a line being drawn, a straight solid line, you'll have like little dotted lines showing that they're there to consult and provide guidance. And then some of the informal structures may not ever appear on the chart, so you may not always see as much of those kinds of committee structures. Might be outlined in policies, but they may not be fully integrated on an org chart. So this is kind of to demonstrate the span of control, and you'll hear that term in anything related to structures. So, you can see there's a board of trustees, their administrator. How many different vice presidents do you have? How many middle managers do you have? How many frontline managers do you have? And so the more directors that you have, or the more flat that you're, if you look at the difference between these two, you've really taken out a whole level of vice presidents, right? Instead, you're really having more of an administrator and then the departments themselves. And so the people in the span of control picture on the top left, those folks have a whole lot less people that are under them usually, because it's like a couple people and they go straight down the chain, and then they've got a leader in there. And so the span of control is a whole lot less people to report to. So if you have more people in a broader stance, like say I've got 6 charge nurses, in another unit they just have 2 charge nurses, I really just have to talk to 2 people. I don't have to manage 6 people. So a lot of times you think about the span of control, most people would tell you as a nurse leader, your span of control should be no more than 8 to 10 people. So to get the best results out of people. But if you've got 50 employees and there's no middleman, you're going to have a very, very huge span of control, and it's going to make it extremely difficult to lead people when you've got that many direct reports to you. So these are some of the implications for leadership and management. You go through you'll hear the term restructuring. We've decided we're rearranging what jobs do. We may re-engineer the whole structure and just change the complete structure from one structure to another, and you have a lot of changes that occur from that in terms of personnel, and do you have the right level of specialization in people and those kind of things. It is important that there is a transparent and very participative approach, like we said, from the bottom up in this day and age, to really make sure that structures work for organizations. Transformational leaders are very important, as we've already talked about. The need for interdisciplinary work I've already mentioned, and then really looking at doing an organizational assessment for ensuring that you really do have everything that you need. The rest of this really kind of deals with some of the current trends that you may see in healthcare we've already discussed, and I'll let you just kind of look through, and then I'll start back up and talk